Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining so promptly. I'm just going to give people a couple more seconds to join and then we'll make a start. But thank you for joining me this afternoon. This webinar is focused on the new set of English apprenticeship standard funding rules. So hopefully you all know what you're here for. But yeah, this is a walkthrough. This is an annual event that I deliver, and it's to support you kind of understanding what changes are coming with the funding rules and what implications they may have. We are going to record the session so that people can obviously have a listen back. My colleague Kate will send out a link to where the recording is stored after the session. If people have got questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I won't be checking the chat during the session, but I can do a little bit of a roundup at the end. If there's anything that I can't answer now, I will try and get some answers and I can reach out individually. And also, if anybody does want to pick up anything separately with any specific questions, then Kate will put my contact details in the chat at the end. So yes, welcome to this webinar titled The New Government Apprenticeship Funding Rules. A little bit about Cogent, if you don't know about us, we are the sector skills body for science and technology. We support the industry with all matter of skills needs. We have a variety of different business units. I sit predominantly in the charity, and we support our employer collaborations, help support with skills needs. I've been with Cogent for just over 4.5 years now. I am Rachel Roby, our technical education and standards lead, and my predominant background is in apprenticeships, hence why I provide this support session on an annual basis when the new funding rules do come out. We also do many other things. If you want to find out a little bit more about Cogent, please feel free to reach out to myself, or I can put you in touch with other colleagues. But yeah, we are here to support, and my background is predominantly apprenticeships. So any apprenticeship specific questions, please feel free to reach out and we can see what help we can provide. So where are we at the moment? So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a rundown of some wider policy background. I thought it was important because some of the things that I will talk through as the session goes on are based around some of the fundamental policy changes that are currently happening with our new government. So for those that I'm sure everybody on the call knows, we do have the first Labour government for 14 years. They have come in with an agenda for change. They are a mission-led government, and one of their missions is around opportunity for all, but obviously underpinning that is their growth strategy. So DfE have been very busy since they came in July to look at the current system, and they are starting to make changes. And I think it's just important that I spend a couple of minutes just going through what those changes are, which will provide some context. So this slide just gives you a bit of an overview of where we currently are. So the Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education, which has been the arm's length independent body that has supported the development of apprenticeship standards, qualifications and T-levels for the past decade, has now closed, and we now have a new body, Skills England. So they fully launched on the 1st of June. We have been following that transition really closely to understand the roles, the responsibilities, and what the priorities of Skills England will be. And we are getting more information about that. With DfE responsible for the overarching policy, we had some announcements earlier this calendar year. So during National Apprenticeship Week, we had some indications of some quite significant changes that the new government wanted to bring in. They had spoken about introducing more flexibility into the apprenticeship programmes, looking at changes to assessment plans, and also the minimum length of an apprenticeship programme. So I want to pinpoint that for you now, because it will be something that we cover later on in the session. But pending a legislation change, the minimum length of an apprenticeship will be reduced from a 12-month minimum timescale to an 8-month minimum timescale. This requires a legislation change, which has been timetabled to take place before August. So this set of funding rules has been designed to be available from from the 1st of August, which is when the new academic year starts. So they are making assumptions that this new legislation will be in place, and therefore we are supporting you with on those principles. And with that comes the first 7 new apprenticeships, which have been called foundation apprenticeships. They are pitched at level 2. They are based on 8 months, hence why the legislation change, and they are going to be aimed predominantly at younger people to support them entering a sector within the occupational routes. So we have 7 initial standards that have been introduced. I'm just seeing it in the chat. This is based on England only. If you want to pick up any questions around the devolved nations, please reach out separately. So these are 7 foundation apprenticeships. They will be for England, English providers or England based providers and English postcode based individuals to enrol, and they will be predominantly, I would assume, delivered by colleges, but we are waiting to see which providers and where in the country we will see the first set of delivery. If you want more information, I will touch upon foundation apprenticeships a little bit later, but yes, that kind of sets a bit of the scene around some of the legislation changes around 8 months. What we also know is that the government have got plans to reform assessment plans. So we know them as endpoint assessment plans, and they do have planning and policy changes pending, which could impact when assessment takes place during an apprenticeship programme. Because those changes haven't come in, they have been referenced in the funding rules, but they haven't been built in, and no funding rules have been adapted when it comes to endpoint assessment currently, but we are expecting more news on that, and if that comes with any changes to the funding rules, we will keep you in the loop. And we are still waiting for news on how the apprenticeship levy will be expanded. Most people will hopefully know that there is plans to widen the apprenticeship levy into the growth and skills levy. We've had many different iterations of what that could look like. We don't know anything else currently other than that the foundation apprenticeships will be funded through the levy, and that is their kind of first new policy that will be allowing the apprenticeship levy to be used for alternative programmes. So when it comes to what we know from Skills England, we understand that they are being asked to provide advice to DfE on a single view on the skills needs. We had the launch a couple of weeks ago, last week, and with that their second report launched, along with the priority sectors that will come from the industrial strategy, which we are waiting for. We understand that they have produced some sector needs assessment. So this slide just talks through some priority areas that us at Cogent focus on, and my colleague Kate will put a link in the chat to the full report. And all of the sector needs assessments. We also have a Cogent breakdown, which talks in a bit more detail about these sector needs assessments. So if anybody wants them, please put your contact details in the chat, and we'll make sure that you get a copy of a document that we've put together. But predominantly the findings from the sector needs is that employers are asking for more flexibility. They like the apprenticeship model, but they would like to have more flexibility. There's a recognition that apprenticeship standards can take long to update. They are inflexible in their design, and with the needs expanding, for example, digital and data, we need more flexible skills offers to be able to support upskilling and reskilling. There is specific needs around some of the sectors. So there's an element around attraction and perception, specifically being raised in advanced manufacturing and clean energy, and understanding what new roles they're going to be, and then what those skills gaps and how we upskill people. Life science predominantly, the feedback on high level needs of training, which is why many companies are disappointed with the recent level 7 funding announcement. But overall, the overwhelming theme coming through is flexible training, new different styles of training, whether that be more boot camp style model, intensive training modules. So we will wait to see what comes from future policy positions, and if that then adjusts funding rules or adjusts what apprenticeships look like in the future. And obviously we will keep you in the loop with all of that. But back to the main topic for today. So we do have a set of funding rules. We did communicate out to stakeholders. There was an announcement kind of February, March time that the Department of Education we're fully closing the ESFA, so that is the body that looked after all of the funding, and as of the 1st of April, all of that department transferred to the Central Department for Education. So any reference to ESFA has been removed. That may mean that you have either had to or in the future may have to sign new agreements as they start to wind down the paperwork that had ESFA on it and now has the Department for Education instead. We were also told that they weren't going to come out with a draft set of funding rules. So normally what has happened in the past is a draft set of rules has been launched in about May time, and then they've ran a feedback cycle and had a consultation, and then they have published the final set or version 1 set. They decided not to do that this year, given that there was lots of changes coming, and instead they have worked with a small group of stakeholders from providers, awarding organisations and selective providers to put these rules together. Obviously, we were keen to raise concerns about that. We want obviously to make sure that employers have a view on the funding rules, but as it stands, this is the set that is going to be used from August. If excuse me, if during this session, or if you do have a little bit more of a deep dive into the rules and you start to pick out things that you're concerned about, please reach out, because this is an open conversation that I want to have by launching this today. But if you start to have concerns, or you start to see some bad practice maybe being introduced, or you start to have concerns around some of how these rules are being interpreted, please reach out, and obviously we can do a little bit of digging in the background. But overall changes to this set of funding rules. So the ESFA has now closed. We are seeing the changes that were announced earlier this year have been reflected in this new set of funding rules. The biggest practical change, which I'm going to spend a bit of time on, is around off-the-job training, and that there's a transition of off-the-job training calculations. And then we also have further guidance relating to English and maths, and this follows on the announcement earlier in the year about a flexible approach to over 18s, and along with information on payments, eligibility and new assessment principles. So I'm going to talk it through stage by stage. I've just seen a question in the chat about the slides. We will release the recording, so hopefully you can view the recording after the session, and yeah, you can, so don't frantically worry about making any notes. So where are we? So summary of changes. So you'll see on this next slide, and the way that this webinar will run is that it will be a title slide for each of the sections, and you'll see in that bottom right hand corner there is a reference to where these paragraphs and where these notes have been accumulated from within the actual funding rules. I know that Kate is sharing some links as we go, so this is kind of a reference guide if you want to look at the full rules. You obviously can do, and here's a bit of a prompt as to where you'll find the specific rules. What I don't do in these sessions is go line by line. I hope you understand I am trying to keep you awake. This isn't always the most thrilling subject, but I think it is important that we talk you through the funding rules, but I just provide a summary of what I think is the most appropriate and most applicable information for you as predominantly employers on the call. But obviously if you want to have a look in more detail, if you are a provider that is more than welcome to join these calls, obviously you will have a different view potentially, and we'll have to look at the rules in more detail. So let's go into English and maths first. So we have clarification that English and maths will continue to remain mandatory for all apprentices that start their apprenticeships before their 19th birthday. This continues from a dispensation that was introduced in February and was an immediate change to the funding rules. So anybody that was 19 plus, either currently on an apprenticeship or about to start their apprenticeship from February, they had an option to whether or not they wanted to partake and enrol on a functional skill. What I have found, there was an FO, a Freedom of Information request, and we have seen through an FE Week article in the last week that 60% of 19 plus learners have opted to stay on functional skills programmes, which I think is really positive, because at the time we did raise public concerns that we were worried about this coming in. So it's good to see that 60% have stayed enrolled on their functional skills. But what it means is learners have choice. Some people still say that it isn't fair that 16 to 18s need to remain on functional skills programs, but 19 plus don't. But this is currently the rules, and we will monitor whether those rules flex over time. What they are saying is providers must, and that's why I've highlighted it, make apprentices fully aware that there is funding available to them, and they have to get the agreement either way from employers, and that discussion must be documented as part of the enrolment and initial assessment process. So a conversation should take place, a transparent discussion that funding is there and that support would be provided, but that it is an optional part of an apprenticeship for 19 plus. Funding shouldn't be claimed until the training has commenced, and the responsibility is that of the provider to make sure that the training continues and that there is evidence of ongoing training. So where providers talk around setting out a training plan and a timetable of when activity will happen, if English and maths is delayed for a little while, or if the functional skills training doesn't start until maybe 3 months into the apprenticeship, you can only claim the funding for when that training period happens. And if there is potentially a stop, if people want a bit of a break from their English and maths, they must obviously stop claiming funding and only claim it on on a basis when it actually happens. And that's all about the activity, either through the e-portfolio system being really up to date, that is being clarified through the progress reviews that take place every 10 to 12 weeks, and employers obviously to stay engaged in that process and make sure that your learners are receiving the training that they are enrolled on, and that the provider is supporting the apprentice to develop their English and maths, or one or the other, and be prepared to take the assessments. What it's also saying is that the apprentice, if they already hold an equivalent qualification, or if they don't want to undertake a functional skill qualification, then there is no mandatory requirement for a learner to undertake a diagnostic assessment or submit their prior attainment learning evidence. This gives me a little bit of a concern, and this next, for anybody that's been to these webinars before, I go through the rules and then I give my view. I will say this is my personal view, and you can agree or disagree, but on the whole, I'm pleased to see that funding has been continued for 19 plus. I'm glad that providers are responsible for making people aware that the funding is there and that has to be documented. What I am a little bit concerned about is that not having to show evidence, not having to do any diagnostic assessments, could hide potentially some learning needs that people will have throughout their learning journey. So we talk a lot about embedding functional skills into the main programme, and I'm sure for many of the apprenticeship programmes that you have learners on, and they do need their English and maths, whether that's working out calculations in an engineering environment, whether that's accountants where maths is their everyday, communication skills, whether that's their written communication or their verbal communication. And sometimes not doing initial and diagnostic assessments can hide some things. So I think my advice to you as employers would be to encourage your individual learners to undertake assessments. Doesn't mean that they're going to have to enrol on anything, but it gives every party involved a transparent view of where their English and maths is up to, which can then either support you to understand if there are any learning needs that either the provider can help with or you need to support with during their development on or off the job. And it just it leads to a transparent and open conversation around if they need some extra help. What I do also would recommend is having those discussions with your individual apprentices who are 19 plus around the benefits of undertaking their functional skills. I've long said, and I know that colleagues that support our collaborations have said that maths and English is really, really important. We worry about the impacts of people not having their functional skills, maybe if they want to progress from a level 3 onto maybe a level 4 or 5 or 6 apprenticeship, and what gaps that could bring. So we're conscious that this is a learner's choice and a learner's decision, but just encouraging the benefits of refreshing their English and maths, undertaking it, knowing that they've got the support from you as an employer, and obviously being open with the provider on what that learning plan will look like. Moving on to the outcome of initial assessment. So just as a little bit of background, if anybody is relatively new to apprenticeship programmes, the initial assessment is part of the induction and sign-up process. What tends to happen, and this isn't obviously everybody's induction and onboarding is individual, but what tends to happen is when either somebody has inquired about enrolling onto a programme or has been recruited to be an apprentice, they will be sent a series of assessments, documents, guidance materials, etc. from the provider, and you go through a series of activities so that you can fully understand where the learner is on day one, which helps then inform the development of the training plan. And what this set of rules is re-clarifying is that the provider must demonstrate that the individual requires significant new knowledge, skills and behaviours to be occupationally competent in their job role. They have restated this because they removed some of the wording in a previous set of funding rules. So they wanted to re-clarify, and the word significant has been something that we've seen a lot through documentation throughout the years. An apprenticeship isn't for somebody that's already in the job role and isn't just to cement the job that they do. They need to be able to show significant new knowledge, skill and behaviour. Obviously, in previous sets of funding rules and on the old model, they would have to show that they have 12 months worth of learning. But obviously, with the changes that are coming to off the job hours, they are having to show that there is significant new knowledge, skills and behaviours. I don't think this will practically change anything from a provider point of view. They go through what's called a skills scan. They will ask critical questions. They will get a benchmark of where your learner's current knowledge and skill level is. And then that will identify what learning is required, and then that will help them develop a training plan. What it may mean, and this will be conversations that you already have with your training providers, they may deem that some parts of the programme aren't needed to be developed. Your learner might have excellent communication skills, so they might not feel like they have to deliver all of the communication elements. And what that then brings in is a more tailored training plan to meet your learners' needs, and also a renegotiation of the cost, because the DFE will only allow for new knowledge, skill and behaviours to be funded. So that's where there may be an adjustment in the payments that are drawn down from the levy or drawn down from public funding, but that will all be obviously discussed. And what I would say is there's always been discussions around, the training plan must be signed before the learner starts. It should be open and transparent, and they are clarifying this in the funding rules by explaining that All of the outcomes of initial assessment should be discussed. Providers must make sure that all parties understand the results, and that they must then be able to transcribe all of that feedback and all of those test results into a tailored training plan. What they are saying, and this is something that they've introduced more flexibilities through the pandemic and then after the pandemic, is that this discussion can happen in person, or it can happen virtually. As we know, Teams, we're all meeting over Teams. You can still have discussions. You can do this remotely, and that digital signatures will be authorised to be able to sign the training plan. Now, a lot of the time now, providers are using digital platforms, so e-portfolio systems, and they will send the documentation through. You as an employer, or whoever has been nominated as the signature to the apprenticeship agreement, will get these documents electronically, and then you would log in and you would sign them. But what they're saying is this should be discussed. You should have a transparent conversation. I'm saying to you as employers, you should feel that everything has been laid out, and that you should be happy with the training plan, or challenge it and ask for feedback if you want to, and if there's any adjustments. And also that the learner understands exactly what their expectation is. There is an outline of how a new module will be introduced, how long is it going to be running for, when are assignment deadlines, if assignments are being built in. So it's something obviously that needs to be done properly. It does take time. I'll be honest, it can be a bit of a pain, but it is worth it in the end to do this training plan properly, to be able to then get everybody on the right foot for when you're starting. And from a compliance point of view, and I'm sure many of you have compliance elements in your role, from a provider's point of view, and just to support our providers, it is really important for them that they have signatures on these documents, that they do have the evidence from you as an employer. It is an auditable process, apprenticeship funding, as it's public funding, so they need to make sure that they can tick their boxes. So that's why they do need your help on signing documentation, on your learners completing all of their pre-work. So please work with them. Please encourage your learners, allow them some time to be able to do any tests that they're asked to do, because all of this builds a picture for all parties to know what's happening from day one of the programme starting. So I'm going to move on to off-the-job training. This is probably the biggest part of, for me, the changes that are coming in this year. Some of you may already know, some of you may already be having conversations with providers where this has started to be mentioned, but I'll try and walk you through what I know so far and what has been recorded in the rules. So, setting the scene from the past, an apprenticeship was based on a 12-month programme. You had to have 12 months worth of learning, and that learning was pitched at a 20% off the job funding. And I was talking to somebody yesterday in a meeting, and they said, it was really easy to sell an apprenticeship because it was going to be 3 years long, and it was going to be 1 day a week. Every Friday the learner would go off and do their off-the-job learning, and then they would be back and we would do their on-the-job. Now that has started to shift over the last couple of years. So in the last set of funding rules, we had an adjustment to a baseline of 6 hours a week. So the 20% figure started to disappear, but that there was a requirement for at least 6 hours a week, or over the period of time during the apprenticeship programme that an apprenticeship was delivered. What happens behind the scenes when an apprenticeship is being designed? So for those that have been involved in Trailblazer activity, one of the tasks that a Trailblazer group has to determine is the minimum length of stay of what they think the apprenticeship should be. And that has always been published in months on the apprenticeship website. So on the IFATE website, when you look at the top paragraphs, it will always have in months what the kind of expected length of stay is. Now that hasn't been kind of built into law. Providers have flexibility to, as long as they have delivered for 12 months or over, they have been able to, to flex delivery. But we've had quite stable programs over the years. Yes, there's been occasions where providers have started to streamline their delivery, so therefore they may have reduced programs by 6 months, for example, and that's because they've learned that through their programs they can streamline modules, they can flex delivery plans. They might have overestimated how long something would take, and that has meant that they can readjust the learning, and that means that they can readjust the program length. But what is being introduced now is that every standard will and has been given a minimum amount of hours that needs to be delivered. So we have a table that has been published alongside the funding rules, and as we go through the slides, and Kate will share the big link that has got all of the standards. Each standard has been allocated a minimum value of off-the-job hours, and that ranges from 187, which is equated to 8 months in their calculations, and obviously goes up to programs that are 12, 1300 hours, depending on how they have calculated. What I will say as a bit of a caveat is they haven't been particularly transparent about where these hours have come from. We have questioned it and we are still waiting for some answers. They have said that they have used a variety of evidence, including the average amount of time that previous apprentices have been enrolled on. They've used evidence from the funding calculations that we gather, but there isn't an exact science around it. But what they are saying to meet the funding rules is you must be on a programme for at least 8 months, and you must receive your expected off-the-job hours, unless you have some prior learning, which can then be reduced, and you will be able to reduce the hours, but you must stay on the apprenticeship for 8 months. So you can't have less than 187 hours of learning to have delivered. But what this means is that training plans can be even more flexibly designed now. And if you want a learner to be fast-tracked through an apprenticeship, you could do that in 8 months if you are committed as an employer and the learner is committed as a learner, that they would probably need, well, they will need to do more than what has been based on the day a week or the 6 hours, depending on how the models have worked. Now, we do know that lots of training providers have used flexible models over the last couple of years. We know that there are providers that will do a year off the job at the beginning. So we know it's popular within engineering and manufacturing. Learners will go to college, they will do a year off the job to learn the fundamentals, and then they will come back and they may go on day release, or they may be with the employer all the time, and an assessor would come in and see them. We have also seen models where people will go for block releases, so they may go to university or college for 2 or 3 weeks every term, and then they will come back to work and they will have be able to embed the knowledge and skills that they have learned through their intensive blocks. So we are waiting to see what impacts this will have. I know we're having conversations with providers. I know some employers have already raised a few concerns around what impacts this could have in terms of how programs will be designed. I'll be honest, I don't envision much change coming straight away, because this has landed quite late for providers to start revolutionary changing their delivery. But I think it's something that we need to watch this space on in terms of the impact. My fear, and I don't want to scare anybody, but my fear is that providers will want to deliver shorter length apprenticeships. And I think we need to be really careful that we're reflecting the needs of you as an employer, the needs and well-being of the individuals that would be enrolling on programs, and the implications that it would mean for all parties if 12 months was squeezed into 8 months, or 2 years was squeezed into 15 months. Because the one thing that we have said time and time again is that competence takes time, and we need to ensure that just because a learner has had all the knowledge delivered and they may come back to you to develop the skills, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're competent and able to go to endpoint assessment, be able to show off all their skills and be truly safe, in a safe, confident, etc. So I've just put in kind of my view. Again, it isn't to kind of be Debbie Downer, but at the same time I am just concerned that this kind of policy has come from nowhere. We haven't had full transparency on where the hours have come from, and that we want to ensure that, yes, the minimum hours are met, but they're met in a realistic time frame to allow that learner to do their learning in a good way, learn the job that they're doing, or be able to manage the job that they're doing, have a life, and then be able to be confident that they are getting everything out of their apprenticeship programme, and that they're able to use those new knowledge and skills. The next 2 slides is just an overview of some key standards that we monitor. So for those that work with us quite closely, either attending SCI8 or if they're a member of the Science Industry Partnership, you will know that we monitor, because we are heavily involved in the development and upkeep of many apprenticeship standards. So we've just pulled a table here of the most commonly used standards that we monitor, which has an indication of the minimum off-the-job training requirement. And then on the next slide, I'm just going to move forward, but please remember we'll share these, we'll share this recording so you can have a look at this. We also have the nuclear standards that we also support. So we have the minimum off-the-job hours for those as well. This document was published at the end of April. We haven't had a second version, but I have identified that there's a couple of new standards that haven't been reflected on the document yet. My colleague Kate, thank you. You've just shared the hyperlink that takes you to the full report. So obviously recognise that some of you deliver and have lots of apprentices on different programmes. It's definitely worth having a look. It's worth looking, and I would personally recommend that you maybe have a look at what your existing apprentices on some of the same programmes, what their off the job hours are, and see if you can do a bit of a cross reference to see whether the hours are going up, the proposed hours are going down. And if you aren't already in conversations with your providers, I would really recommend that you start to speak to them about how they're going to integrate this change of the funding rules into their programme. Are they going to just do business as usual for September 2025 and maybe start to look at how they can adapt in the future? Or are they going to make changes, which you obviously need to have some conversations about up front, because you may have sold a programme to an applicant when they joined or when they were applying for the job with you as a new start. And obviously, if programmes and timetables are going to start shifting, then it's important that every party knows that before, obviously, September or when their due start date is. I hope I've explained that well. If anybody does want to pick it up separately, then obviously please reach out or put anything in the chat. I'm going to move on just because I'm conscious of time. Move on to apprenticeship agreements, minimum duration and employment hours. So there's a couple of bits on here that have just been picked up that I noted through the funding rule changes. So this sets out an admin element, but it would require a conversation and a signature. That if an apprenticeship programme is going to be extended, then a new agreement must be signed. So there is just clarification that documentation needs to be kept up to date if there are planned changes. So for as an example, if somebody goes on a break in learning because they're off sick, then they come back onto learning, but you agree not to condense the learning that they've missed into the existing time frame that they were due to go to finish and go to Gateway. If you and the learner have agreed that they need to extend their time, then that means that an apprenticeship agreement needs to be re-signed with some new dates, and then the provider needs to update on the system that is the case. So that's just a clarification rule. And then they have also updated, so you can imagine when they update certain rules, that then has a knock-on effect to other rules within the set of funding rules. So they have reflected the 8-month minimum duration into the guidance and into the funding rules. And they have also included some clarification and some new instructions around people that work less than 30 hours a week. So again, for those that might not be fully versed, an apprenticeship and the 8 months will be based on a 30-hour-a-week contract. We've always encouraged, and obviously employers that employ people on part-time and 0 hours contracts, that apprenticeships are still a way of learning for them. But obviously there has been a natural aversion to increase the time on programme for them. And there used to be funding rules around, if you only work 16 weeks, you had to double the amount of time a learner was on programme for. What they're saying now is the off-the-job training, because it isn't going to be based on months, or it isn't going to be based on weeks, because it's based on hours, the new changes should not be a barrier to achieving an apprenticeship. So the amount of hours that you work shouldn't be a negative on whether you can enrol on an apprenticeship and successfully undertake it. What they are saying is you need to have, again, open and transparent conversations around how long an apprenticeship would run for, and what you would need to give and take for somebody that is part-time or works different shifts. So night workers have always been something that we've had conversations with and supported employers to understand the implications of people that might be on night shifts as part of their contracts. But that a realistic duration is agreed. But what they have said is that part-time and 0 hour contract learners can finish earlier than their planned end date, as long as they have met the hours and they have met the 8 months minimum. So it is saying that there is going to be more flexibility. They want to encourage more people to do apprenticeships. They don't want to put people off who aren't obviously working. I think it makes sense. I've put in the comments, it's common sense to be making these flexibilities, but I have concerns around the impact that this would have on a learner. And obviously I would hope that all of you as good employers would be working with your providers and working with your employees to ensure that any commitments weren't an overstretch, and that you are continuously monitoring the impact of maybe a more condensed learning plan for an individual that worked part-time, because obviously and naturally, if they're only working part-time, can they attend all the modules that they're expected to do, and do they have enough time to embed those skills and that knowledge to be truly occupationally competent? So again, I would just be really careful when you're looking at it. Don't be led down basing a part-time on a full-time training plan. Allow those individuals to have more time, plan it accordingly and keep monitoring it, and then obviously if you do need to make any changes, you would need to change the apprenticeship agreement if an extension was required. Couple of final sections on this. This is quite a busy slide, but it gives you some financial incentives. So first of all, there is an element of some especially degree programs, but there are going to start to be, we're going to see more integrated apprenticeship standards. And what that means is when an apprenticeship is integrated, there isn't an independent assessment at the end. There would be an assessment by the provider, because it's all built into the programme. So for anybody that has learners on the laboratory scientist standard, that has now changed into an integrated scientist core and option standard. So what that means is that the provider is responsible for delivering endpoint assessment, and what the rules are saying is that for those standards that are integrated, that the provider is responsible for setting the costs of endpoint assessment, and for all non-integrated standards, the responsibility sits with the EPAO. So again, that just kind of clarifies, and I think they've clarified that more because we're starting to see more integrated standards being introduced. They are traditionally at higher levels, but there is a policy view that more standards across different levels could become integrated. And as we start to see changes potentially with other assessment plans, we will start to see maybe more of where the costs are not particularly clear for a period whilst EPA reforms are coming in. And then there's some clarification around incentive payments. So the government has recommitted their incentive payments. So £1,000 of funding that supports providers and employers. So there is some guidance on here, and there's some guidance on the timescales. Obviously, they've built these in because a person might not be on programme for 365 days, which is when 50% of the payment was generated. So what they've said now is that 50% of any payments would be generated 90 days after the start date, which is what's normally happened. So a learner gets to their first review, they stay on the apprenticeship programme, and that would trigger the application for half the payment. But what they're saying now is that remaining payment can be generated after 242 days if a learner is on a shorter duration programme, or if a learner goes straight to Gateway, then they can the funding can be generated. I know that the providers keep responsibility of the application, so it's worth just having conversations. Funding is available for 16 to 18-year-olds or 19 plus if you have an educational healthcare plan, or have been or still are in the care of a local authority. So I would be transparent in my conversations with providers. If you do have 16 to 18-year-olds and you want to claim these payments, make sure that you're filling the documentation in, make sure you're keeping a check, keeping a kind of diary reminder of when the payments may be generated, and therefore you can work with the provider to ensure that you get the funding. They also remain committed to the £3,000 that the previous government introduced for a tax-free care bursary, and if people want more information on that, please speak to your providers, and they've provided some guidance on when that will be paid, and that it will be paid in equal instalments. So again, if you do have any care leavers, or you do have anybody that is in care working for you, and they're on an apprenticeship programme, please obviously make them aware. They will hopefully have been made aware of this money that is available to them, and support them through the claiming of this money that they are entitled to. So that brings me to the end of where the key changes of the funding rules are. I hope you found it useful. Just before we finish, I just wanted to go back to foundation apprenticeships, just because this is something that's quite new. It might not be something that's of interest to many of you, but equally it is a new way to train people. It is a new way to bring younger people into our industries and support them. So we have done a little bit of work in the background. As I said at the beginning of the session, they are pitched at level 2, but they won't develop full occupationally competence. They have the courses that have been, or the standards that have been put together, have been based on existing apprenticeships. So if you do already use level 2 in your companies, it might just be worth having a look at some of the apprenticeships that have been designed for a foundation purpose. The one that I've paid most attention to is the engineering and manufacturing apprenticeship. That has been based on the level 2 engineering operative, and therefore it gives learners a taster and some introductory knowledge and skills on the world of engineering and manufacturing. There is some more information. I have put together a bit of a guide of what we know so far. So if anybody would like a copy, please let me know and I can send it to you. We won't automatically send it out, but if it's something that you might want some more information on, please let me know. And if anybody has got any follow-up questions from today's session, if anybody wants some clarification on the rules, or if you're confused, if you're not sure how to apply the rules, I'm hoping that, well, I do know that providers, I had a call with a provider the other day and I was talking about the funding rules, and they had the document and they had kind of waved it and said, oh yes, I'm looking at it on a daily basis. So providers are good at looking at the funding rules. It does take a little bit of a time to get people's heads around the changes. I know that the sector bodies that support providers also support the sector. So there is lots of webinars going on at the minute on how providers can interpret the rules, new documentation and templates coming out. So we do have these sort of changes every year. I think the biggest change that will take a little bit of time to get used to will be the off-the-job training. I don't think this is probably the end of some of the rules changing, but we will wait to see what future policy brings. Through the academic year, the DFE quite often release different versions. My commitment to you is if some new versions come out, we will update you. Please follow Cogent on our social media, reach out to me, reach out to colleagues if you have got any further questions. And if you want some additional help and support on anything apprenticeships, just get in touch and we can help you with any questions or queries, or put you in touch with providers if you're looking at introducing new programs in the future. But yes, thank you. I'm just going to check the chat just to see. Just bear with me a second. So yes, an introduction from Faye, apprenticeship agreement. Yeah, so an apprenticeship agreement is a different document. It is a DFE document that the provider will update. There's a pro forma they will fill in, and then you'll be required to sign it. It is separate from a contract of employment. Providers do ask to obviously make sure, they have to check that an apprentice has a correct employment contract, and that employment contract takes them to the end of the training programme plus EPA, and that is really important that you discuss with your individuals and with your providers that if you are only taking somebody on for the length of their apprenticeship programme, you must give room and give time for EPA at the end, and the provider will ask for sight of that. But yeah, it's a separate document. So I think that's the end. There's a couple of apprenticeships. Yeah, so thank you, Kate, for sharing the links. Obviously, there's a link to the growth and skills reports from Skills England. We have the set of funding rules if you want to see the full document, and then the Annex C, which is the Excel document which shows all the hours. I will close the session now unless there's any final comments or questions. Like I say, I hope you found it useful. Any follow-ups, please do get in touch. And we'll be in touch if there's any other significant changes that come through. But yes, thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of your day.